So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, thank you for joining us. Please take a moment to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of Islamic history. And if you enjoy this journey, a like and a comment truly help us more than you know. Now let's begin. The year is 1609, the port of Valencia, Spain. Thousands of people are being forced toward the ships, carrying only what they can hold in their arms. Weren't they Spanish? They spoke Spanish. Their clothes barely differed from their neighbors. In truth, they had lived on this land for nearly 1,000 years, but none of that mattered, because these people carried one single crime. Their ancestors had once been Muslim, or had returned to Islam in secret. The world called them Moriscos exclusively, but meaning a little more. They had been forced into baptism, forced into church pews. But behind closed doors, inside their own homes, many still prayed Salah in secret. How did the authorities find them out? The methods were disturbingly simple. If a woman walked to the river too many times a day, she was suspected of making wudu. If a gardener washed his arms during work, he became a target. If a clean burial shroud was found inside a home, that family could be dragged away and tortured. The eyes of the Inquisition were everywhere. And after 100 years of surveillance and suffering, King Philip III of Spain made his final decision. Every one of them would be expelled. The official decree was written in gentle, reassuring language. They will not be harmed. Their belongings will remain untouched. The reality on the ground told a very different story. The road to San Mateo in Valencia filled with the bodies of murdered Moriscos. Some ship captains took their passengers' money and then threw them into the sea. Those who reached North Africa were turned away, accused of carrying disease. Many more fell prey to bandits along the way, at least 3 million people. Some historical sources suggest the number reached even higher. Families who had called this land home for 9 centuries, erased in a single decree in a single night. For hundreds of years before this, Muslim Spain, known as Al-Andalus, had lived through a golden age. Followers of 3 different faiths built a shared civilization together. But after power shifted, generations before this expulsion, that golden age slowly slid into darkness. So how did a civilization that helped build Spain's greatest era end in such devastating cruelty? The answer begins 9 centuries earlier at a narrow strip of water. Let's go back to where it all started. Because if you don't understand how this story begins, you cannot truly understand how it ends. The year is 711, the Strait of Gibraltar, a narrow stretch of sea. On the far shore stood a powerful kingdom, Visigothic Spain. On this shore, a small force, roughly 7,000 men. Their commander was Tariq ibn Ziyad. According to tradition, after his soldiers landed on Spanish soil, Tariq gave an extraordinary order: burn the ships. Think about what that meant. He was destroying his own path of retreat, an enormous act of resolve and sacrifice. From that moment forward, there was only one option left: move forward or perish. But how could such a small force ever defeat a mighty kingdom? Part of the answer lay hidden inside Spain itself. King Roderick of the Visigoths had seized his throne through force. Many powerful noble families despised him for it. Some historical accounts describe one of Roderick's rivals, a border governor known as Count Julian, quietly cooperating with the Muslim forces, even helping them cross the strait. When people are willing to act, unexpected paths tend to open. After the Muslim army crossed into Spain, the decisive Battle of Guadalete began. It stretched across 7 grueling days. Roderick's army vastly outnumbered his opponents. But partway through the battle, something unexpected occurred. Segments of the king's own forces switched sides or simply abandoned the field. Roderick was defeated. His body was never recovered. After this victory, Tariq ibn Ziyad did not slow down. He pressed northward. City after city surrendered, many offering barely any resistance at all. For a great many people living under Visigothic rule, this did not feel like an invasion. It felt like liberation from a harsh and unpopular king. Within just a few short years, nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula came under Muslim rule. A small expeditionary force had toppled an entire kingdom. But this was merely the opening chapter. Conquering the land had proven to be the easier task. Ruling it, and building something lasting from it would prove far harder. And one of the most dramatic turns in this entire story had not yet arrived. A young prince would soon flee for his life, cross the sea alone, and find refuge on this very soil. His journey would shape everything that followed in Al-Andalus, because the state he would go on to build would not simply be another conquered territory. It would become a civilization forged out of survival, hope, and rebirth. The year is 750, a riverbank just outside Damascus. The surviving male members of the Umayyad dynasty had been invited to what was presented as a peace gathering. The Abbasids welcomed them warmly, with food and kind words. Then the swords appeared. It became one of the most consequential moments in early Islamic history. Nearly the entire Umayyad family was killed that day. Resentment toward the Umayyads had been simmering for years, and the Abbasids wanted total, uncontested power. But one word matters here, nearly, because one young man escaped. His name was al-Rahman. He was only 20 years old. The moment he learned his family had been slaughtered, he fled into the night with his younger brother. Abbasid agents hunted him relentlessly, from Palestine through Egypt and across North Africa. He spent years as a fugitive. At one point, his younger brother was captured and killed. Rahman was left almost entirely alone. So where could he possibly turn? The answer came through his mother's lineage. His mother was a Berber woman, and her family held strong ties to the Berber tribes of North Africa. Drawing on those connections, Rahman gathered a small circle of loyal supporters. Then he set his sights across the Mediterranean, toward Al-Andalus. In 755, he crossed into Spain with a modest force. Many former Umayyad governors and soldiers still living there remained loyal to his family's name and rallied to his side. In 756, near Cordoba, he defeated the local Abbasid-aligned governor and took the city. At only 25 years old, a prince whose entire family had been murdered, who had spent years running for his life, was now ruler of his own state. But notice something important. He did not claim the title of caliph. He chose the more modest title of emir, remaining cautious of the Abbasid caliph ruling from Baghdad. Later historians gave him a fitting nickname, the Falcon of Quraysh. Like a falcon, he had survived alone, relying on nothing but his own strength, and risen again. The state Rahman founded would become the bedrock of Al-Andalus for the next 2 centuries. But first, he had to put down rebellion after rebellion from within. Consider the scale of what happened here. A young man loses nearly his entire family. He spends years running for his life across 3 continents. Then, thousands of kilometers from home, he builds an entirely new state out of almost nothing. This was not merely a political achievement. It stands as one of history's most remarkable stories of survival and renewal. When Rahman I died in 788, he did not leave behind a flawless kingdom. Rebellions had not fully subsided. The Christian kingdoms to the north still stood, watching and waiting. But Al-Andalus now had a capital, a functioning government, and a dynasty that would endure. The once hunted young refugee had laid the foundation of a state that would last for centuries. And yet, the true rise of Cordoba had not even begun. One day, it would rival Baghdad and Constantinople. It would become one of the most celebrated cities on earth. But first, Al-Andalus needed one more great ruler. In 912, a 21-year-old came to the throne. His name was Rahman III. But the state he inherited was far from the strong, unified realm his ancestors had built. Cities beyond Cordoba governed themselves. Rebellions had broken out across the land, the largest led by the family of Ibn Hafsun in the south. At the same time, the Christian kingdoms to the north exploited the chaos and pressed against the borders. Al-Andalus stood once again on the verge of fragmenting entirely. The young ruler faced a choice: defend Cordoba alone and watch the rest slip away, or fight to reunite the whole of Al-Andalus. He chose the harder path. Soon after taking power, he marched out with his army. Some cities joined him through negotiation, others through defeat. Year after year, city by city, fortress by fortress, he rebuilt the state. This campaign spanned nearly 2 decades. One of his greatest tests was the mountain fortress of Bobastro, held by the descendants of Ibn Hafsun, one of the strongest strongholds in all of Al-Andalus. Rahman III refused to give up. He cut off its supply lines. He seized the surrounding towns. Slowly, the fortress became completely isolated. In 928, Bobastro finally fell. No serious internal challenge to his rule remained. A year later, in 929, he took an even bolder step. He declared himself caliph. Al-Andalus was no longer merely an independent emirate. It had become a caliphate in its own right, claiming political and religious authority alongside the Abbasids of Baghdad and the Fatimids of North Africa. This was far more than a symbolic title. Al-Rahman III wanted the entire world to understand that Al-Andalus was no distant, forgotten province of the Islamic world. Cordoba would stand shoulder to shoulder with Baghdad and Cairo among the great capitals of the age. Under his rule, Cordoba flourished rapidly. Gold and ivory arrived from North Africa. Spices and fine fabrics came from the east. Trade goods poured in from northern Europe. Skilled craftsmen produced leather, textiles, metalwork, and pottery. Agricultural wealth funded new neighborhoods and magnificent architecture. Roads were repaired, bridges and irrigation canals restored. Gardens, fountains, and courtyards became part of everyday city life. Writers of the period praised Cordoba for its wide, clean, well-lit streets. Historians still debate the exact population but agree on one point. In the 10th century, Cordoba stood among the largest and most vibrant cities anywhere in Western Europe. Abdurrahman III also wanted to display his power beyond the battlefield. Just outside Cordoba, he built a magnificent palace city called Madinat al-Zahra. It was not simply a royal residence. It became a new seat of government with offices, gardens, reception halls, mosques, baths, and military quarters. Foreign ambassadors were received there. Visitors from the Christian kingdoms, the Byzantine Empire, and North Africa came to witness the wealth and power of Al-Andalus with their own eyes. When Abdurrahman III died in 961, he left behind a state utterly transformed. Al-Andalus had been reunified. Cordoba had grown rich and powerful. The Caliphate stood among the greatest powers in Western Europe. But this golden age would not be remembered for its palaces or its armies alone. What made it truly unforgettable was its devotion to books, knowledge, and learning. His son, Al-Hakam II, it would turn his father's powerful state into one of the greatest centers of scholarship in the world. When Al-Hakam II became caliph in 961, he sought to merge power with knowledge. The new caliph loved books more than warfare. He gathered not only Islamic religious texts, but also works on history, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Whenever a new manuscript emerged in Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, or any other great city, the court of Cordoba often learned of it quickly. Officials purchased the works, scribes copied them. They were carried back to Al-Andalus. Over time, Cordoba built one of the greatest royal libraries the world had ever seen. Historical sources describe a collection running into the hundreds of thousands of volumes. These were not rare showpieces locked away for display. Translators, scribes, bookbinders, and scholars worked there daily, copying and preparing texts for students. The spread of paper made knowledge easier to reproduce and share. While books remained scarce and costly across much of Europe, the book trade thrived in Al-Andalus. Bookshops filled the streets of Cordoba, and professional scribes earned their living copying manuscripts by hand. Owning books was no longer reserved only for rulers and religious leaders. Wealthy merchants, officials, and educated families built private libraries of their own. Because knowledge was so widely available in Cordoba, it reached far more people than in most of Europe at the time. This was not only a place where old knowledge was preserved. New discoveries were being made as well. Physicians observed illness closely, studied earlier medical texts, and recorded their own clinical experience. They wrote about medicinal plants, treatments, and wound care. One of the greatest scholars of this era was Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, who lived near Cordoba and worked for decades as a physician. He treated patients and recorded his methods in a vast medical encyclopedia. He became especially renowned for his contributions to surgery, describing how to set broken bones, close wounds, treat dental problems, and assist in difficult childbirth. He even illustrated his own surgical instruments. Centuries later, his writings were translated into Latin and became standard medical references across Europe. Astronomy in Al-Andalus went far beyond stargazing. Scholars calculated planetary movement, refined calendars, and improved navigational instruments. Mathematics supported trade, inheritance law, architecture, and land surveying. Agricultural experts studied soil types, irrigation techniques, and ideal growing climates, introducing new canals and water wheels that expanded food production. What made the intellectual world of Al-Andalus so distinctive was that it was never a purely Muslim achievement. Jewish and Christian physicians, translators, and officials were woven into this same intellectual life. A student could learn under a teacher from another faith. Doctors of different religions worked side by side in the same palace. Arabic became the shared language of science across communities. This did not mean Al-Andalus was a perfectly equal society, but people from different communities shared the same cities. allowing ideas to move freely between them. The greatest treasure of Cordoba was never its marble or its gold. It was a culture that encouraged people to question, to seek knowledge, and to keep learning. And at the center of that world, Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived and worked side by side. Al-Andalus remained at its core a Muslim state. Muslims held the center of government, the army, and the legal system. Christians and Jews were permitted to keep their faith, continue their worship, and manage much of their own community life. In return, they paid a specific tax known as jizya. This status offered them protection, though building new churches or synagogues sometimes required official permission. Even so, Al-Andalus extended far greater religious latitude than most of Europe at the time. In many respects, even later medieval Europe did not grant religious minorities such broad standing for generations to come. The streets of Cordoba reflected this diversity daily. Muslim merchants, Christian craftsmen, and Jewish physicians worked in the same markets. Arabic became the common language for much of the population. Over time, many Christians began speaking Arabic, adopting Arabic dress, and enjoying the music of Al-Andalus. These Arabized Christians became known as Mozarabs. They remained Christian but were deeply shaped by Arabic culture. Some Christian clergy at the time even complained that young people preferred Arabic poetry over Latin religious texts, since Arabic had become not just a language of government, but of science, trade, and higher learning. Al-Andalus also opened new opportunities for its Jewish communities. Under earlier Visigothic rule, Jews had faced severe persecution. Under Muslim rule, they were able to rebuild synagogues and community institutions. Many became merchants, physicians, translators, and government officials, some even rising to become trusted royal advisors. One of the best-known examples was Hasdai ibn Shaprut, who served during the reign of Abd al-Rahman III as both the caliph's personal physician and as a key diplomatic envoy. A Jewish scholar holding such an elevated position at a Muslim court was extraordinarily rare anywhere else in Europe at that time. People of different faiths in Al-Andalus did not merely coexist, they collaborated. Muslim scholars studied under Jewish teachers. Christian translators worked from Arabic texts. Jewish physicians treated Muslim patients. They shared markets, bathhouses, and neighborhoods. Still, this peaceful coexistence was never entirely free of tension. During moments of political crisis, some groups rebelled against Muslim rule, and in response, certain rulers imposed new restrictions on minority communities. In later, stricter periods, the open atmosphere of earlier Al-Andalus gradually narrowed. Even so, across these centuries, people of different faiths helped build one shared civilization. The medicine, music, poetry, and science of Al-Andalus were never the achievement of a single community. They were the collective work of people learning from one another, and this knowledge did not remain confined to Al-Andalus. Christian scholars and translators from the north would later carry much of this work into Latin, spreading it across the rest of Europe. By 981, Al-Andalus had entered a far more turbulent chapter. When Al-Hakam II died, his son Hisham II became caliph at only 11 years old. A child could not govern a great caliphate, and into that vacuum stepped one of the most controversial figures in the history of Al-Andalus. His name was Muhammad ibn Abi Amir, remembered by history as Al-Mansur, the Victorious. He began as a court secretary and rapidly became the true power behind the throne. He kept the young caliph confined within the palace while ruling as chief minister in all but name. He demonstrated his authority through relentless warfare. Across nearly 20 years, he led more than 50 military campaigns against the northern Christian kingdoms, close to one major campaign every year. One of his most famous victories came in 997 with the capture of Santiago de Compostela, one of the holiest pilgrimage sites in the Christian world. His army included Muslim Arabs, Berbers, and even Christian mercenaries, since for al-Mansur, loyalty mattered more than background. But beneath these military triumphs, a dangerous weakness was quietly taking root. The Caliphate itself was hollowing out. The caliph remained a symbol, while true power rested entirely with one man. And history offers a hard lesson here. When an entire system depends on a single individual, everything can collapse the moment that person is gone. Al-Mansur died in 1002, and soon after, a crisis began that few had anticipated. His legacy was a strange contradiction. He had never lost a major campaign, yet he left behind a state that could not stand on its own. Power had become so concentrated around him that when he died, nothing remained strong enough to hold the system together. His sons attempted to inherit his position but lacked his ability. The state began collapsing like a house of cards. From 1009 to 1031, Al-Andalus descended into a period known as the Fitna, a time of chaos, civil war, and open struggle for power. Multiple rival claimants declared themselves caliph. Berber soldiers rebelled. Cordoba itself was attacked and looted repeatedly. The city that had once ranked among the greatest in Europe, whose libraries held more volumes than much of France and Germany combined, was now consumed by bloodshed and infighting. In 1031, the Caliphate was formally abolished. After nearly 3 centuries, the Caliphate of Cordoba came to an end. What followed was fragmentation. Al-Andalus splintered into numerous smaller kingdoms known as the Taifas: Seville, Granada, Zaragoza, and Toledo, each with its own ruler, army, and court. Remarkably, this divided era still produced significant cultural achievement. Taifa rulers competed to attract poets, scholars, and artists, leading some historians to describe it as an age of many smaller golden ages. Militarily, however, it was a disaster. The great caliphate was gone, replaced by fractured kingdoms that frequently fought one another. The Christian kingdoms to the north quickly recognized this weakness. Some Taifa rulers even sought Christian military assistance against rival Muslim kingdoms, a sign of just how fractured the political landscape had become. In the north, a new power was steadily rising, and it would no longer remain purely defensive. A civilization once admired across the known world now watched itself fracture from within. History teaches a painful lesson here. No outside force destroys a society as swiftly as its own internal division. Toledo, the former Visigothic capital, had remained under Muslim rule for nearly 350 years. In 1085, its gates opened to the forces of King Alfonso VI of Castile and Leon. This was not merely the loss of one city. It marked a turning point in the broader history of the peninsula. The fall of Toledo shook the fractured Taifa kingdoms to their core. In desperation, several Taifa rulers appealed for help from a powerful movement rising in North Africa, the Almoravids. A disciplined force from the Sahara, united under a strict religious reform movement led by Yusuf ibn Tashfin. He answered the call, crossing into Spain in 1086, and won a decisive victory over Alfonso's forces at the Battle of Sagrajas. Having intervened to save Al-Andalus, Yusuf ibn Tashfin chose not to leave it in the hands of fractured, quarreling rulers. He absorbed most of the Taifa kingdoms under his own authority, reunifying Al-Andalus under a single central government once more. Around this same period, another well-known figure rose in the north, Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar, remembered as El Cid. He fought at various points for both Christian and Muslim rulers before eventually capturing and ruling Valencia himself. His loyalty belonged to neither faith exclusively, but to his own ambitions. Meanwhile, the Christian kingdoms to the north continued to grow steadily stronger. Once again, the Muslims of Al-Andalus turned to North Africa for reinforcement, this time calling on the Almohads, who followed an even stricter religious interpretation than the Almoravids before them. Their arrival brought stricter policies within Al-Andalus itself, and as pressure from the north intensified, security concerns began to outweigh the openness of earlier generations. During this period, some Jewish and Christian communities, along with several prominent scholars, chose to leave Al-Andalus altogether. At first, the Almohads found real success on the battlefield, winning a major victory over Castile at the Battle of Al-Arcos in 1195. But in 1212, everything shifted. For the first time in generations, the Christian kingdoms united. Castile, Aragon, and Navarre, kingdoms that had often fought each other, now stood together against a common enemy, with the campaign formally declared a crusade. The two armies met at the decisive Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, where the Muslim forces suffered a devastating defeat that broke the military strength of Muslim Spain for good. This battle mattered so profoundly because the Christian kingdoms had discovered they were far stronger united than divided, and that unity would reshape the future of the entire peninsula. Within a matter of decades, the great cities of Al-Andalus began to fall. In 1236, Cordoba surrendered to King Ferdinand III of Castile. The very city that had once served as the seat of the Caliphate, home to one of the greatest libraries the world had known, now passed into new hands, its great mosque converted into a cathedral. In 1248, Seville fell as well, after months of siege, worn down finally by hunger and exhaustion. The Muslim territories that had once covered nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula were now reduced to a narrow strip in the south. Only one kingdom remained, Granada. Granada survived through diplomacy rather than strength, paying tribute, trading with its Christian neighbors, and at times even lending soldiers to Christian campaigns. It was no longer an independent power, but a kingdom living on borrowed time, and that borrowed time would last nearly 250 years. During those years, Granada built one of the most extraordinary monuments in the world. Its rulers, the Nasrid dynasty, understood a painful truth. Every Muslim state before them had already fallen, and one day, so would theirs. Rather than surrender to that inevitability, they built as though they could hold back time itself. The result was the Alhambra Palace, rising on a red hill above the city, filled with intricate carvings, tranquil gardens, and reflecting pools, designed as a fragment of paradise on earth. For nearly 2.5 centuries, Granada balanced survival through tribute, trade, and the shifting rivalries among Christian kingdoms. But everyone understood it was only a matter of time. The year was 1482. Inside Granada, a succession crisis broke out. A young prince, Abu Abdallah Muhammad, remembered in history as Boabdil, rose up against his own father. This internal conflict arrived at the worst possible moment. In the north, a royal marriage had reshaped the future of Spain entirely. Queen Isabella of Castile married King Ferdinand of Aragon, uniting the two most powerful Christian kingdoms on the peninsula, remembered together as the Catholic monarchs, with a single unifying goal: to complete the Reconquista once and for all. Granada's internal division gave them precisely the opening they needed. A 10-year war followed. Ferdinand and Isabella gradually surrounded the city, cutting off trade routes and constructing fortified siege camps. Inside Granada, hunger spread, and rival factions turned against one another. Boabdil tried desperately to negotiate terms that would protect his people. On January 2nd, 1492, Granada surrendered. Boabdil rode out to meet Ferdinand and Isabella and handed over the keys to the Alhambra. At first, the terms of surrender appeared generous. Muslims would be allowed to keep their faith, spared forced conversion, with their property protected. Boabdil himself was granted a modest estate in the southern mountains. These promises would not endure. According to tradition, as Boabdil left Granada for the final time, he paused at a mountain pass, turned to look back at the city he had lost, and wept. His mother is said to have told him not to weep like a woman for what he could not defend like a man. That mountain pass is still known today as El Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's last sigh. But Boabdil could not have known just how quickly the promises made to him would unravel. Even before the surrender agreement had fully settled, the first cracks began to appear. At first, Muslims were still permitted to worship freely, but pressure from the Catholic Church steadily mounted. In 1499, a strict church official named Cardinal Cisneros arrived in Granada and launched a campaign of forced conversions. Thousands of Arabic manuscripts covering science, poetry, medicine, philosophy, and religion were gathered in public squares and burned. A civilization that had once housed some of the greatest libraries in the world watched its legacy reduced to ashes. This pressure triggered an uprising in Granada that same year, which was crushed with considerable violence and gave Catholic authorities the justification they wanted to declare the original surrender terms void. By 1502, a final decree was announced. There would be no Muslims left in Castile. People were given a stark choice: convert to Christianity or leave the country entirely. Leaving, however, was made deliberately difficult, with travel permits restricted and ports tightly controlled. Hundreds of thousands were baptized by force. Entire villages were marched to churches and declared Christian. These new converts were given a name: Moriscos. On paper, they were Christian. In their hearts, many remained Muslim, secretly praying and fasting behind closed doors. The authorities suspected as much, and so the watching began. The burning of the books remains one of the most powerful symbols of this entire period. Because what had truly made Al-Andalus great was never its swords, it was its libraries. And now the ashes of those libraries drifted through the very streets that had once celebrated learning above all else. Imagine living under constant watch, your neighbor observing what you eat, how you wash, how you bury your dead, and reporting all of it to a court with the dead. This was daily life for a Morisco. The Spanish Inquisition built one of history's most organized systems of surveillance, designed to determine who remained Muslim in secret. The smallest details could become matters of life and death. A woman visiting the river too often might be accused of performing wudu. A gardener washing his arms during work might be accused of preparing for prayer. A family using a plain burial shroud might find themselves under investigation. One documented case from 1577 describes a young woman overhearing news of the Ottoman naval defeat at Lepanto and quietly remarking to a friend in Arabic that the year had gone badly for them. That single sentence was enough to bring her before the Inquisition. Another case involved a gardener named Miguel Canete, arrested in 1606 simply for washing his arms and head while working. Punishments ranged from imprisonment and confiscation of property to public execution by burning, known as an auto da fe. One especially harsh principle held that if a single family member was found guilty, the rest of the household automatically became suspects, since officials believed no child could adopt heresy without learning it at home. To preserve their faith, Moriscos found quiet, creative ways to resist, maintaining hidden places of worship inside ordinary homes, and secretly corresponding with Muslim scholars in North Africa for guidance. Yet the fear among Spanish authorities never eased, always wondering whether the Moriscos might one day align themselves with the Ottoman Empire or the Muslim states of North Africa. That underlying fear would ultimately drive the final decision. Perhaps the deepest cost of this system wasn't only what it inflicted on the Moriscos themselves. It corroded trust throughout Spanish society as a whole, since a state that trains its own citizens to surveil their neighbors slowly hollows out the trust that holds any community together. By 1609, the Spanish government had settled on what it called a final solution to the so-called Morisco problem. Several extreme proposals had been debated: mass execution, abandonment at sea, forced labor in overseas mines. In the end, mass expulsion was chosen. King Philip III sought approval from the Vatican. Pope Paul V initially hesitated, with the Roman Inquisition favoring continued efforts at conversion through teaching rather than expulsion. The Spanish delegation pressed forward regardless, and on April 23, 1609, the expulsion was formally announced. The timing was deliberate. The Ottoman Empire was occupied fighting the Safavids and managing internal unrest. The Muslim states of North Africa faced their own troubles. No outside Muslim power stood in any position to intervene on the Moriscos' behalf. The official decree used careful, reassuring language, promising humane treatment and protected property. The reality proved far darker. The road to San Mateo filled with the bodies of murdered Moriscos. Ship captains robbed passengers before throwing them overboard. Refugees reaching foreign shores were often turned away, accused of carrying disease. Countless others fell victim to bandits along the way. Roughly 3 million people, and by some estimates considerably more, were driven from land their families had called home for nearly 9 centuries. A people who had helped build one of history's most remarkable civilizations vanished almost entirely from Spain. So what remains today from those 800 years? The Alhambra still stands as one of the most visited monuments on earth. The Great Mosque of Cordoba still stands too, now serving as a cathedral, its ancient arches still echoing the grandeur of that age. Even the words we use every day, algorithm, alcohol, and guitar, all trace their roots back to that civilization. And perhaps most importantly, history still remembers that for 8 centuries, 3 different faiths managed to build a shared life on the same soil. Al-Andalus leaves behind both hope and warning. It shows how tolerance can help build something extraordinary, and it reminds us just how much can be lost the moment that tolerance disappears. The story of these 8 centuries ends here, but its memory has never truly faded. If this journey through history moved you, let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the next chapter of Islamic history together. Allah Hafiz, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.